Everyone knows the story of the Titanic, the grandest ship ever built, the unsinkable pride of the White Star Line that struck the ice and went down. But almost no one knows that the Titanic had a cousin, a black one. Because a few years after the White Star Line's great ship sank, a black man from Jamaica looked at that famous white shipping empire and decided his people would have one of their own. He named it in direct answer to theirs. They had the White Star Line. He would build the Black Star Line, and he would fill it not with the fortunes of the rich, but with the nickels and dimes of millions of ordinary black working people, buying a piece of their own future, $5 at a time. His name was Marcus Garvey. And what he built was the largest black mass movement that has ever existed on this earth. The Black Star Line was its flagship, a fleet of black-owned ships, crewed by black sailors, meant to carry black goods and black people across the world, free of any white hand. And like its famous cousin, this ship would also, in the end, go down. But here is what makes this story different from the Titanic, the thing you will not see coming. When the Titanic sank, the story was over. When the Black Star Line sank, the most important part of the story was just beginning, because they could sink his ships. They could not sink the idea. To understand the ship, you have to understand the man and the movement behind it. Marcus Garvey came to Harlem in 1916 with an idea so simple and so audacious, it electrified a people. Stop begging the white man for a seat at his table and go build your own table. Your own businesses, your own institutions, your own nation. He called his organization the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and it spread like wildfire. By the early 1920s, the UNIA had grown to some 700 branches across 38 states, with divisions throughout the Caribbean, Central and South America, Canada, and Africa, and a following counted in the millions. It was, and remains, the largest organized movement of black people in the history of the world. Garvey gave them a newspaper, the Negro World. He gave them parades and pageantry and a flag, the red, the black, and the green, that flies as the Pan-African flag to this very day. And most of all, he gave them a feeling most of them had never been allowed to have: pride and the belief that they could own things. And the crown jewel of it all was the Black Star Line. Garvey understood something profound. A people who do not own their own commerce will always be at the mercy of those who do. So he would build a black-owned shipping company to trade between the black communities of America, the Caribbean, and Africa. A global black economy moving on black ships. And he did not finance it with banks or white investors. He sold shares to the people themselves, $5 a piece, at UNIA conventions and through the mail and in the pages of the Negro World. Domestics, porters, sharecroppers, washwomen, ordinary black people who had never owned a share of anything in their lives, bought a piece of that dream. And it worked at first, spectacularly. Just 3 months after incorporating, the Black Star Line bought its first ship, When the Yarmouth launched on the Hudson, thousands of Garveyites crowded the Harlem dock, jumping and cheering and throwing their hats in the air. In Cuba and Central America, black supporters came down to the harbors on horses and donkeys and makeshift carts, just to lay eyes on the first ship they had ever seen owned and captained by black men. Garvey stood before them and said, "They told us the Negro had no brain to engineer a corporation, to own and run ships. O ye of little faith, the eternal has happened." For one shining moment, a dispossessed people watched their own ship sail and saw the future. But a great vision is not the same thing as a well-run company. And this is where the story turns, and where the lesson lives. The Black Star Line was a magnificent idea placed too often in the hands of people who had no business running a shipping line. Garvey was a genius of vision and a poor judge of operators. He surrounded himself with the loyal and the passionate. But loyalty is not competence, and passion does not know how to run a steamship. His associates, by the account of historians, had no background or training in maritime business at all. The results were ruinous. They bought their first ship, the aging Yarmouth, for $165,000, when the vessel was worth maybe $25,000. Garvey's own hand-picked captain was later accused of taking a kickback on the purchase. They bought other ships, just as overpriced and just as broken down. One blew a boiler and killed a man. One sprang a leak and sank at its pier in the Hudson. An auditing committee opened the books and found them a shambles. Money poorly recorded, accounts unbalanced. On one voyage, an entire cargo of coconuts was left to rot because Garvey insisted the ship make ceremonial stops at politically important ports instead of, delivering the coconuts. The dream was seaworthy. The management was not. And if the incompetence inside was the leak below the waterline, there was also an iceberg deliberately steered into its path. Because the United States government had decided Marcus Garvey was dangerous. A young, ambitious Bureau of Investigation official named J. Edgar Hoover, the same man who would spend the next half-century hunting black leaders, set his sights on Garvey as early as 1919, and Hoover put it in writing in a memo that should be taught in every school. Garvey, he complained, had not yet violated any federal law, but Hoover wanted to find some way to get him anyway. Read that again. The plan to destroy Garvey came first. The crime was something they went looking for afterward. Hoover hired some of the Bureau's first black agents specifically to infiltrate the UNIA, and according to historians, agents sabotaged the Black Star Line directly, placing foreign matter in the fuel to wreck the engines. Between the unqualified hands on the wheel and the saboteurs drilling holes in the hull, the ship never had a chance. In 1922, they finally found their crime. Garvey had mailed a brochure picturing a ship the line did not yet own. For that, a picture of a ship, he was charged with mail fraud. He represented himself badly. Of 4 defendants, only Garvey was convicted. He was sentenced to 5 years, imprisoned, and in 1927 deported back to Jamaica. The Black Star Line was finished. The flagship of the largest black movement in history had gone the way of the Titanic, down into the cold water. And if this were the Titanic's story, it would end right here, on the ocean floor. But it isn't, and it doesn't. Here is what the men who sank the Black Star Line never understood. You can repossess a ship, you can deport a man, but you cannot deport an idea once it has been planted in millions of hearts. And one of those hearts belonged to a little boy in the Midwest whose parents were Garveyites. His father, Earl Little, was a Baptist preacher and a local organizer for Garvey's UNIA, who took his small son to the meetings. His mother, Louise, was the branch reporter, sending news of their chapter to Garvey's Negro World. In that household, the children were raised on Black pride, taught to sing the UNIA anthem, read the news of the movement at the kitchen table. That little boy's name was Malcolm Little. The world would come to know him as Malcolm X. The most electrifying voice of Black self-determination in the 20th century was raised from infancy on the teachings of Marcus Garvey. Malcolm said it himself. Garvey, he declared, planted the seed which has popped up in Africa everywhere you look. And Malcolm was only one tree in a whole forest that grew from Garvey's seed. The Nation of Islam, the organization that built a $75 million black economy on the principle of do for self, was Garveyism in a new robe. Its founders and its program drew straight from the well Garvey had dug. Elijah Muhammad himself had been involved with the Garvey movement before he ever led the nation. The Black Power movement of the 1960s, with its fist in the air and its cry of self-determination, Garvey's children. The Rastafari, who treat Garvey almost as a prophet, Garvey's children. The independence movements that swept across Africa, that Malcolm said Garvey's philosophy inspired in leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. Watered by Garvey, the red, black, and green flag that flies at every black cultural event in the world. Garvey's. The man failed at running a shipping company, but he succeeded at something infinitely larger. He planted in a scattered, beaten-down people the unkillable belief that they could own themselves. They took his ships. They took his freedom. They took his country from him. They could not take that. So what do we take from Titanic's black cousin? Two things, and we have to hold both, because half the lesson is a trap. The first is the hard, practical one, and we cannot flinch from it. A great dream is not enough. Garvey proved that millions of black people would invest in owning their own future. The appetite, the capital, the will, all of it was real. And it was magnificent. What failed was execution. He put loyal but unqualified people in the seats that needed experts. He let passion do a professional's job. And the lesson for everyone who would build something for their people today is written in the rusted hull of the Yarmouth. Vision must be married to competence. Love your people enough to put the qualified person in the chair, not just the loyal one. Keep the books. Hire the captain who can actually sail. The dream deserves operators as serious as the dream. But the second lesson is the one that matters most, and it is the opposite of despair. They did everything they could to sink Marcus Garvey, and, in the narrow sense, they won. The ships went down. The man was caged and exiled, and his enemies congratulated themselves. They thought they had watched another Titanic go under. What they did not understand is that the Black Star Line was never really carrying coconuts and passengers. It was carrying an idea. The idea that a people written off as helpless could pool their pennies, build their own institutions, and own a piece of the world. And an idea, unlike a ship, does not sink. It drifts ashore in the heart of a Garveyite son named Malcolm. It washes up in the do-for-self economy of the Nation of Islam. It surfaces in a fist raised at the Olympics, a flag at a festival, a continent throwing off its colonizers, a hip-hop group naming itself Black Star half a century later, because the dream still meant something. The Titanic went down and took its story with it to the bottom. Garvey's ship went down, and the dream it carried swam to every shore it was headed for, and then some. So when they tell you the story of the Black Star Line as a punchline, a failure, a fraud, understand what they are really trying to sink, not a kippenny. The belief that we can own our own future. That belief survived bad management, survived J. Edgar Hoover, survived prison and deportation, and 100 years of being mocked. And it is still afloat right now in anyone who decides to build instead of beg. They sank the ship. The dream refused to drown. Now the only question is, who picks up the cargo it was carrying, and finally captains it right?